The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for NCEA's webinar, Federal Education Programs and Benefits for Private School Students and Teachers, brought to you in partnership with the U.S. Department of Education. I'm Andrea Kopp, Manager of Educational Resources for NCEA, and I'm happy to host this webinar for you. Before we begin, please know that all your microphone connections have been muted. If you have questions during today's presentation, please send those through the question box that appears in your GoToWebinar panel. To ask a question, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question using your keyboard, and then click Send. The webinar presentation will last about an hour. You can post your questions at any time for our presenters, and they will be added to the queue. Immediately following the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a brief survey about your webinar experience, and I thank you in advance for providing us with this valuable feedback. For those of you who are attending the webinar live, you'll find a copy of the presentation materials and your certificate of attendance in the Handouts section of your GoToWebinar panel. You can download those at any time. You'll receive an email tomorrow with instructions on accessing this recording. Before we get started, let us begin, as we do all things, in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our presenters, Maureen Dowling, Director of the Office of Non-Public Education, and Ashley Gardner, Management and Program Analyst, here with us from the U.S. Department of Education. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Andrea, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maureen Dowling, and I'm the Director of the Office of Non-Public Education at the U.S. Department of Education, and it's a real pleasure to be present to conduct this PowerPoint presentation for you today along with my colleague Ashley Gardner. Just as an aside, for those of you participating in this webinar, I was a former Catholic school principal in the Diocese of Arlington for 8 years, and so I know this is a very busy time of year for you, and so thank you for taking the time, those of you who are involved in the educational, whether it's at the school or the diocesan level, to learn a little bit more about federal education programs and benefits for private school students and teachers. Some of you may be aware of the Office of Non-Public Education. We are a small but mighty team. Pamela Allen is our lead for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and also the Emergency Management Programs. Isadora Binder takes the lead on Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as well as homeschools. Ashley Gardner is our go-to for information on state regulation of private schools, green ribbon schools, and statistics on private and home schools. And Janae Morrissey takes the lead on equitable services provisions of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which covers all the other programs other than Title I Part A. And Janae is also our key point of contact for the Blue Ribbon Schools program. We are located in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Department of Education headquarters, right across from the Air and Space Museum. So let me go over the agenda. And while I'm going over the agenda, Andrea is going to conduct a quick survey of our audience, and she'll be asking you to respond to a quick poll. So for our agenda today, we'll talk about the Office of Non-Public Education, also known as ONPE. We'll also focus a little bit on the Elementary and Secondary Education Act equitable services requirements and the Individuals with Disabilities Act equitable services requirements. And then we're going to just touch upon some other federal education programs that your schools may be interested in regarding such as the Teaching and Principal Ambassador Fellowship Program, the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools. We also have information on the Blue Ribbon and Green Ribbon schools, teacher loan forgiveness. We'll talk about private school statistics and other programs that our National Center for Education Statistics manages, and talk about some of the resources we have available to private schools. And questions at the end that we want to open up the discussion, and any questions you might have about any of these programs or anything else, we're happy to address those. Okay, Andrea, do we have the results yet from the poll?
We do. 44% of our audience are school administrators, principals, or presidents. 22% are teachers or curriculum coordinators. 11% are state or federal program managers. 11% are third-party providers, and 11% are diocesan leadership. So we have some from all the different areas. Great audience today.
That's great. Thank you for completing the poll. And we'll have a couple other polls throughout the presentation. Many people are surprised to learn that there's an office related solely to focus on private elementary and secondary schools and home schools within the U.S. Department of Education. Our mission is statutorily based. Congress created us and created our mission, which is to maximize the participation of private school students and teachers in federal education programs. And we do that through a number of ways. We represent the department in a liaison role to the non-public school community. We provide advice, counsel, and guidance on all issues related to non-public education within the Department of Education. We communicate with and provide technical assistance to state educational agencies, local educational agencies, private school officials, third-party providers around the implementation, particularly of programs under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which I'll refer to primarily as ESEA, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. At the same time, we are a vehicle for the private school community and the homeschool community to communicate their interest to department leadership, where issues might arise, whether it's around federal education programs or other concerns. They will contact our office, relay their concerns, and we'll facilitate communication either by way of a meeting that we might host or a conference call with ed leadership. And as the department's liaison office, I would want to note that ONPE has had a very positive and long-standing relationship with the National Catholic Educational Association, as well as a number of other national private school organizations. We actually collaborate with practically every other office at the department, so we have many contacts. Part of our role is to network with our colleagues here so that when there are issues that arise to the federal level as related to these programs, we have our go-to contacts in order to solve the problems and resolve them as quickly as possible. And just by way of background, to give you a framework of private schools within our nation, a little over 5 million students are in private schools. Almost 10% of students who are enrolled in schools in the U.S. are enrolled in private schools. About 25% of all U.S. schools are private schools. About 80% of private school students attend religious schools, and about 20% attend non-sectarian schools. And then about 69% of private schools are religiously affiliated. So predominantly private schools in the U.S. are faith-based private schools. All these statistics are taken from the Digest of Education Statistics, which is put forth by the National Center for Education Statistics. This slide here represents, it's actually the image of the Office of Non-Public Education homepage. And the easiest way to find our homepage would be if you were to go out to the Department of Education, which is www.ed.gov, and in the search engine, put in ONPE, and that will bring up this homepage. Or you can also just Google Office of Non-Public Education, and generally that will get you to our website too. And on our website, you'll find just an array of resources and information. Where it says information about non-public education, that information there is where you'll learn about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, both as reauthorized under the No Child Left Behind Act, which is still currently in place, and then also the Every Student Succeeds Act, which you may be aware just was passed last December 2015, and the equitable services provisions in that new law will go into effect in the 2017-2018 school year. And I'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to the slide around the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I'd also like to encourage you, if you haven't already, to join the ONPE listserv. We do not bombard you with email messages through that listserv. We really only send out a listserv message when there's something new to tell you, such as new guidance on the Every Student Succeeds Act, or applying for the blue ribbon schools or green ribbon schools, and also when we have information as related to other new federal programs that we want you to be aware of, and new statistics on private schools. Okay. In 1965, President Johnson signed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it was part of his war on poverty. And since that passage in 1965, what you should be aware of is eligible private school students and teachers were going to receive benefits through the ESEA. So participation of private school students and teachers under the ESEA, it's not new. It has been there from the beginning. And the reason is because Congress was school blind. It was based on the child benefit theory or principle, meaning if a child meets the eligibility requirements, we don't care the school in which the child is enrolled. It's going to benefit the child. And it's really important to know that equitable services under ESEA as well as IDEA are not provided in the form of money to the private schools. Rather, the equitable services are provided through the local educational agency, or LEA, in the form of direct services to either eligible students, their teachers, and in some cases even parents. I suspect some of you who are participating in this webinar have students and or teachers who receive some benefits under ESEA. What I'm going to highlight on this slide are the main provisions as related to equitable services, and I would say the main provisions in a nutshell. So what is an LEA responsible, obligated to do in implementing ESEA equitable services? Well, they must provide services that meet the needs of the eligible students and teachers. They will always administer and keep control of funds and actually anything that might be purchased with those funds, so materials and equipment. They maintain the ownership of those materials and equipment. They are to allocate funds for equitable services on an equal per pupil basis. We don't have time today to go into the details of how they do that. We'll be doing further webinars over the course of the coming year where we'll get into the weeds on this, but at least you should be aware this is an overarching principle. Also, in the provision of the services, regardless of the program, those services must be secular, neutral, non-ideological, and supplemental in nature. And what we mean by supplemental is these are services that go above and beyond what you provide for your students and teachers. These services can never supplant what you would normally do with your funds and with your school program. Also, the LEA is responsible for assessing the services that they provide and evaluating those services. Thus, if the LEA is providing Title IIA professional development for your teachers, under the law, they are to consult with you about, okay, we're going to provide this benefit, this professional development. Let's discuss how we will assess its impact. You know, what did the teachers think about that professional development? We might have them complete a survey at the end of the professional development, and then we might ask them, how will they use this in the classroom? Was it effective in helping them become better instructors? One other note, as I'm going to talk about the new law here in a moment, but one other note I think that's important is that the LEA must engage in timely and meaningful consultation about these programs. And in order to do that, the LEA must ensure that it's consulting with private school officials on an ongoing basis and ensuring that the private school official can bring to the table the information that will help the LEA make the decision about the kinds of services that will be provided. Clearly, only the private school official can bring to the table the needs of those private school students and teachers. And the law requires that, and also the new law requires this, before the LEA makes any decision that will impact the participation of private school students and teachers in federal education programs, it is required to consult about these programs and the needs of your students, the allowable activities, the amount of funding available with private school officials. As I mentioned earlier, in December 2015, the President signed into law the Every Student Succeeds Act. Now, important to note, currently, as related to the participation of private school students and teachers, we are still under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as authorized by the No Child Left Behind Act, or NCLB, as perhaps some of you on the line may know that. So we're still under NCLB through the rest of this school year. Something important to note about the Every Student Succeeds Act, it really advances the legacy of equity and opportunity by requiring states to hold all students to challenging academic achievement standards that prepare them for success in college and careers. And also, ESSA affirms the obligations of states and LEAs to provide equitable services to private school students, teachers, and other educational personnel. It includes a number of new provisions under the equitable services provisions in Title I and in Title VIII. In one sense, most of what was in the ESEA as amended by NCLB just kind of rolls over, but there were some significant changes, particularly as related to funding formulas, and also there's some new provisions as related to consultation. On this chart, you see we've kind of set it up where we have the No Child Left Behind Act, remains in effect through school year 2017. Under NCLB, those provisions were found in Title I, Section 1120, and Title IX, Sections 9501, 9504. In the new law, ESSA, which goes into effect in the beginning with the 2017-2018 school year, the equitable services provisions in Title I are now in Section 1117, and the Title IX uniform provisions, they've just moved to now Title VIII, Sections 8501 and 8504. That's getting into the weeds a little bit, but again, as we conduct some additional webinars in collaboration with NCEA in the coming year, we'll get into the weeds on this. But one thing, for those of you who are real maybe policy wonks or love the law, we have out on our website a comparison chart where you can see the current law, NCLB, as compared to the Every Student Succeeds Act, and you can see exactly, oh, I see what changed, I see what's been deleted, to help you understand what's new, what remains, and maybe what has been changed. So I just want to highlight just a few new provisions under ESSA. In general, and we've been sharing this, we just had a presentation on Monday and Tuesday, Monday and Tuesday with state educational directors of federal programs. The new provisions in the equitable services sections really strengthen and enhance the equitable services provisions and provide more state and district level accountability. A few of the new provisions, and maybe you've heard about this, states now are obligated to designate an ombudsman at the state level to monitor and enforce the equitable services provisions. Also, states are required to notify private school officials of funding allocations for equitable services, and they'll work with their LEAs because LEAs do some of that determination. In addition, there are new funding formulas for both Title I and Title II Part A. Under Title I, now the formula to determine how much the LEA must expend for private school students for Title I services, that amount is determined off the top of the total allocation that the LEA gets. That wasn't the case in the past. The LEA could take off lots of reservations. Now that amount to serve private school students under Title I is determined right off the top. And under Title IIA, the LEA is to determine the amount to provide equitable services under Title IIA from its total allocation after taking off what it needs to for administrative costs. There are some new consultation requirements in both Title I and the Title VIII governing provisions. And for those of you who may not be aware of this, Title VIII governs a few programs. It governs the Title II Part A program, which provides professional development for teachers. It governs the Title III program, which is a program for English learners. It also governs the Title IV Parts A and B, which are programs that provide for a well-rounded education and also for 21st century community learning centers. That's why we have those Title I and Title VIII. They govern different programs within the law. There's also an option for states to provide equitable services in place of the LEA, but that's under very specific circumstances. Again, more details will be forthcoming on this. However, you should be aware that the department has recently provided guidance on the new law, and you can find that guidance on the ONPE website. If you go to our home page that I just showed you and click on to the Every Student Succeeds Act, another page will pop up which will have guidance, technical assistance, promising practices, other resources. And the Fiscal Changes and Equitable Services guidance, which is here shown on this slide, that guidance would be your first go-to guidance, because that's where you'll find information on all the new ESSA provisions, both under Title I and under Title VIII. In addition, on December 20th and January 10th, ONPE will be providing a webinar on the new law and the equitable services provisions. It's the same webinar, but we're offering it on 2 different dates. Okay, at this time, I'm going to hand over the presentation for a little bit to my colleague, Ashley Gardner.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Andrea right now is going to conduct a quick survey about whether your eligible students with disabilities have ever received services under IDEA, as it's commonly called. IDEA is a federal law that ensures that all children with disabilities receive a free and appropriate public education. It provides benefits and services to children with disabilities in public schools as well as in non-public schools, which can include religious schools. However, when parents choose to enroll their child with a disability in a private school, when the question of providing FAPE is not an issue, the public school district's responsibility will differ from its responsibility to serve the public school students. Under IDEA, LEAs have an obligation to provide parentally placed private school children with disabilities an opportunity for equitable participation in services funded by federal Part B funds that the LEA has determined. After consultation, to make available to its population of parentally placed private school children with disabilities. The amount of Part B funds available for these services is based on a proportionate share calculation. ONPE has a number of resources to help clarify the IDEA requirements. The booklet pictured here specifically addresses these requirements. It's available on the ONPE website as a PDF, or you can order it from EdPubs in a booklet form. Andrea, would you share the results now?
Yeah, our results were split down the middle. 50-50 said yes, and 50% said unsure.
Okay, thank you for that. As with ESEA, consultation is a mandatory process for IDEA. It involves discussions between the LEA, private school representatives, and representatives of parents of parentally placed private school children with disabilities on key issues relating to the equitable participation of eligible private school children with disabilities in the federally funded special education and related services. Each LEA, or if appropriate in the case, an NCEA, must consult in a timely, meaningful way with private school representatives and representatives of parents of parentally placed private school children with disabilities during the design and development of the special education and related services for parentally placed private school children. A unilateral offer of services by an LEA with no opportunity for adequate consultation or discussion, such as such an offer, will not meet the basic requirements of the consultation process. Only after discussing key issues relating to the provision of special education and related services with all representatives may the LEA make its final decisions with respect to the services to be provided to eligible school children with disabilities. There is a basic requirement for the provision of equitable services under IDEA. It is important to note that timely and meaningful consultation must occur before any decisions are made that will affect participation of parentally placed children in Part B programs. Thus, decisions about services may not be made in advance or in absence of timely and meaningful consultation. After timely and meaningful consultation has occurred with private school representatives and representatives of parents of parentally placed private school children with disabilities, the LEA is responsible for making final decisions about all aspects of the services to provide to parentally placed private school children with disabilities.
Ashley, I just want to add something here. So as Ashley noted, consultation is both part of ESEA and IDEA. What is different, however, under the ESEA, in general, LEAs will consult with either all private school officials within that district. In the case of a diocese, there might be a diocese appointee who handles the federal education programs for all the Catholic schools. Under IDEA, the LEA is required to consult with representatives of the private schools and of parents of parentally placed private school students with disabilities. So in that case, under IDEA, representatives of parents of those parentally placed private school students with disabilities are part of that consultation. And I just wanted to note that distinction with ESEA. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Maureen. The Department of Education has recently been hearing some questions about the participation in federal or state private school choice programs and how that affects students' participation in an ESEA or an IDEA program. To be clear, participation in a federal or state private school choice program does not affect a private school student eligibility for equitable services under an ESEA or IDEA program. Like other private school students, a student is eligible for equitable services if the student meets the eligibility requirements of the program.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ashley. What you heard among both those programs is the phrase equitable services, timely and meaningful consultation, proportionate share, funding. The programs we're going to discuss now are not programs such as ESEA equitable services and IDEA equitable services. They are a different kind of program that the department sponsors and provides for public and private schools to participate in. And again, in this case, these are programs that you can choose to participate in or not. The Teaching Ambassador Fellowship Program is a program that the department offers, and the reason we have this program is because we're seeking to actually have teachers come to the department and provide them with opportunities to both understand what happens at the federal level, but also contribute their insights, their experience and expertise to the policies that impact their students and school communities. Because as we seek to implement policy and programs, it's good for us at the federal level to have that local insight from teachers. Now, this program really supports, for the fellows, the program adds greater knowledge of educational policy and leadership to their toolkits to contribute to solutions at local levels, and when they go back to their schools, what they've learned here should impact what they're doing at that local level. The program offers 2 separate year-long tracks. The Washington Fellowship, this is a full-time appointment. It's based right here at the department headquarters in Washington, D.C. And then there's the Classroom Fellowship. This enables teachers to participate on a part-time basis for the department while actually staying in their regular schools, keeping their regular teaching responsibilities. In addition to taking on individual tasks subject to their unique background and expertise, all the teaching ambassador fellows collaborate with one another, as well as with the principal ambassador fellows, to address common goals. And I would just say that each year, if you're on our listserv, we send out information encouraging private schools to consider having their very best private school teachers apply for this. When they come to DC, they do get paid for that full-time work that they do here, and the school promises to hire them back upon their return. And to date, we have not yet had a private school teaching ambassador fellow, so we're hoping we get one soon. So we encourage you to go out online and learn more about this program. Similarly is the Principal Ambassador Fellowship. And this is a means of recognizing the critical impact that principals have on instruction and student achievement, the school climate, the impact they have on improving the programs at the school, and also their role in the community and in engaging families. This program was launched in 2013, and it's modeled on the Teaching Ambassador Fellowship program. Here again, it's our goal to have principals at the U.S. Department of Education to bring their knowledge and experience to this national dialogue about public education, as well as private education, as appropriate at the federal level, and in turn, for them to learn more about federal education policy. Here again, we have yet to have a private school principal participate in this program, and we're hoping again that in this coming year there might be some principals at the private school level who might be willing to apply for the program. There are 2 separate levels to this, and they are year-long and paid positions. Again, the Washington Fellowship is a full-time principal in residence appointment based at the Department of Education, and a campus fellowship, which enables principals to participate on a part-time basis while, of course, maintaining their primary responsibility as a school leader. So even if you're thinking, oh, I wouldn't want our principal to leave or any of our principals to leave, or if you feel you can't leave, there's this part-time opportunity. So we hope you'll go out and investigate this program online and consider applying for it. The Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools program, or REMS, the department hosts REMS TA centers, and this supports schools, public and private, and school districts, institutions of higher education, along with their community partners in developing high-quality emergency operation plans, or what we call EOPs. The wealth of resources on the rems.ed.gov website is staggering. We offer live as well as archived webinar trainings. We have PowerPoint presentations for download, as well as online courses, and available at the self-paced individual learning mode. We have live training available by request. It can even be delivered on-site at your school or a district, or for a group of schools or institutions of higher ed. The REMS TA Center staff are available to respond to your direct requests for technical assistance. You might have questions about emergency management, really on a variety of topics pertaining to emergency operations and how you plan for that. There's also interactive emergency management planning tools available through the center, and a self-assessment form so you can actually assess how emergency prepared your school is. And on this note, I would just say, having been a former school principal myself, I rarely had enough time just to do the work of the principalship. If I were to go back to being a principal, what I would do is I would ask someone on my school board to be the REMS contact so that they would go out online and do this. We appreciate that most of you in leadership positions don't have the time to be going out to these websites, but if you can leverage the people who can be a wonderful resource in your community. There's also a community of practice. It's a virtual space for representatives from schools to collaborate on special projects, share news and resources, discuss trends and ideas. Here again, if you have a designated individual who can help you at that school level, that would be a real benefit to you. And the great thing about this, it is all free, free, free. And I know you love that word. Okay, so before I hand it back to Ashley, I want to talk about the National Blue Ribbon Schools program. And let me just say from the start, every year since this program's inception, Catholic schools have been recognized. So on this, you're way ahead of the game. So the National Blue Ribbon Schools program, it was established in 1982, and it's really to recognize the hard work of students, educators, families, and communities in creating safe and welcoming schools where students excel and do well. Private schools that meet the criteria of exemplary high-performing schools can be nominated. And basically, high-performing means that the achievement of the school students in the most recent year tested places that school in the top 15% in the nation in reading or language arts and mathematics as measured by a nationally normed test, or in the top 15%, top 15% of its state as measured by a state test. And if a private school administers both state tests and nationally normed tests, the school must be in the top 15% in both of those standardized tests. Disaggregated results for student groups, including students from disadvantaged backgrounds, must be similar to the results for all students tested. So as you look at your entire school population, disaggregating that data to see how well certain groups do, students with disabilities, English learners, low-income students, those results need to be similar to your overall results. And the graduation rate for private high schools must be 95% or higher in the most recent year. You've missed the application process for this year, as it usually begins in the fall, in October. And the department actually has contracted with the Council for American Private Education to do and facilitate the Blue Ribbon Schools process for private schools. I'm sure many of you on the line are familiar with the Council for American Private Education, or CAPE. They process and facilitate that application process, and then each year CAPE submits formal nominations to the U.S. Department of Education in January, and then final applications are due to the department in February. The Secretary of Education announces the recipients in September, and then what's really exciting, in November, all are invited, generally 2 representatives from each of the private schools and public schools that are selected, to a wonderful, exciting awards ceremony in the fall. And it's a great ceremony. And let me just say this, the Blue Ribbon Schools is a wonderful opportunity to market your school. So if you haven't heard about it, or you haven't thought about applying, get out online and learn more about it, or have one of your school board members go out and report back to the school board. You don't need to do the work yourself. Okay, I'm going to pass this over to Ashley, who's going to talk about Green Ribbon Schools, which is her area of expertise.
Yes, I have to say I have a little preference for the Green Ribbon Schools. The goal of the U.S. Department of Education's Green Ribbon Schools is to inspire schools to be resource efficient, promote safe and healthy communities, and provide environmental and sustainability education to students. And once a school has been honored, we hope that they show leadership in the field to support other schools on the pathway to these goals. Since the first year of the award in 2012, 43 private schools have been recognized as Green Ribbon Schools to highlight their exemplary practices and achievements in all 3 of the pillars. For a school to be nominated, they must be nominated by the state agency to the U.S. Department of Education's Green Ribbon Schools program. Details regarding the application requirements may be found on the program website included in this slide, and from that website you can also find additional websites with plenty of resources on how to work through the program of Green Ribbon Schools. Yeah. I don't know if you know this as private school for the private school teachers, but they also can participate in loan cancellation and deferment if they are eligible. So in accordance with the Higher Education Act, the general guideline regarding teacher loan cancellation and deferment is that a teacher in a low-income area or who teaches in a particular subject matter field might be eligible for loan cancellation or deferment, including private schools to the extent they meet the particular loan cancellation or deferment program requirements. To qualify for teacher loan forgiveness, a borrower must perform qualifying teaching services at an elementary or secondary education school that is in a school district that qualifies for funds under the Title I of Elementary Secondary Education Act of 1965 as amended by No Child Left Behind, that has been selected by the Secretary based on determination that more than 30% of the schools or educational services agencies' total enrollment is made up of children who qualify for services provided under Title I, and that is listed in the annual directory of designated low-income schools known as the Teacher Cancellation Low-Income Directory. The Secretary considers all elementary schools and secondary schools operating by the Bureau of Indian Education or operated on Indian reservations by Indian tribal groups under contract with the Bureau of Indian Education to qualify as schools serving for low-income students. So there is, at the bottom of the page is a link for everyone to be able to search the directory of teacher cancellation low-income state contacts.
And just one note on that, particularly those of you on the line who are aware of schools within your diocese or perhaps it's your own school where you're serving a significant population of low-income children, again, would encourage you to have someone in your school to investigate this, to look at the eligibility requirements, and then where you need some assistance to reach out to that state contact.
The National Center for Education Statistics puts out many surveys about the status of education in the United States. Private school students and private school teachers are involved in many of the surveys and assessment programs for the center. The Private School Universe survey is run biannually and collects data on schools' characteristics such as enrollment and affiliation and staffing matters. Private school students are part of longitudinal studies that follow cohorts of students over periods of years. Right now, NCEA is preparing to run the first national longitudinal study on the middle grades. And private school students, school teachers, and principals are asked to participate in the schools and staffing survey. It is important for the private schools to participate in these surveys as we talked about the statistics that represent the education, how much private schools do represent education in the United States. Private schools have participated in the National Assessment of Educational Progress, commonly referred to as NAEP, since the beginning of the assessment. Private schools represent about 25% of schools in the nation and educate about 10% of students. Therefore, in order to have a complete picture of academic progress of the nation's students, participation of private schools is necessary. In order for the Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics to publish results, the private school subgroup must have 70% participation rate. In the past few years, this participation rate has not always been met, and thus the department has not been able to report the national private school results separately. They are reported as the overall results. Although the overall participation rate among Catholic schools has fallen over the years as well, Catholic schools have met the 70% participation rate, and thus the department has been able to publish funding for Catholic schools even in cases where it has been impossible to take out the subgroup of private school results. NCEA and other national private school organizations have encouraged their member schools to participate in NAEP, and ONPE strongly supports your continued participation in order to ensure that published results show a complete picture of our nation's students. performance. At this point, we are going to transition to the other federal programs administered by agencies outside the U.S. Department of Education. ONPE maintains on its website an evolving list of federal programs administered by agencies outside the department that are relevant to the non-public school community. This slide shows a snapshot of such programs. Additional programs may be found on the ONPE website by clicking a link listed there. Given the programs listed are administered by federal agencies outside of the department, we encourage you to reach out to the individual program contacts if you have any questions. For your knowledge, in general, the Department of Education does not regulate private elementary and secondary education schools or homeschools. Government regulation of private schools is limited, and if any regulation is decided, it is usually at the state level. The Office of Non-Public Education is in the process of updating its resource of state regulations of private and homeschools, and is now available electronically on the ONPE website. The resource synopsizes state regulations relevant to the non-public school education and provide essential links for reference. Also for your reference, ONPE has compiled a list of U.S. Supreme Court rulings that nationally affect private schools and homeschools, and this information is located on the state regulation map webpage as well.
Actually, I just want to add something there. As Ashley noted, we don't have jurisdiction over private schools and homeschools at this federal level by and large. Interesting enough, though, we do get phone calls and emails from generally parents who have students in private schools. And the reason I want to just touch upon this, it might be helpful for you to know in our liaison role how we handle such calls. Because at the same time, even though we don't have jurisdiction, we always seek to be as helpful as possible because we're working on behalf of every American citizen. Generally, if we get a call from a parent who has a child in a Catholic school, we always will ask, have you had an opportunity to speak to the principal? So we'll always ask them or kind of take them through some steps. And if the answer is yes, we'll say, well, you can also speak to the pastor. In many schools, if they have a parish school, the pastor would be the next line of or in the chain of command. If they have said yes to that, we'll also ask them if they've considered contacting the diocese and to speak to the Catholic school superintendent. Sometimes we might even recommend, if necessary, the Catholic conference, but normally the diocese is where would be the final point for that parent. And again, in recommending these various individuals with whom the parent can speak, we're not making a judgment about the concern, the complaint. We're really seeking to help that individual parent move through the process for seeking some resolution or to address their complaint. We also will inform them that to contact the State Department of Education, because the state, generally most states do have some, to varying degrees, regulation of private schools, and there could be a state regulation that comes into play as related to their particular complaint. And in that case, it's another avenue for which they can inquire and get feedback. And finally, we let them know that the parent-student handbook is, in a sense, what the school commits to do. And it's in that parent-student handbook that they should also refer where there's a particular concern, whether it's referenced, that issue in the parent-student handbook. So I just wanted to share that with you so that you're aware of that as we seek to be responsive to the individuals who contact us. Thanks, Ashley.
Certainly. Did I double click?
Go back one.
Sorry about that. I must have hit the cursor a little too hard.
Oh, I guess there we are.
Oh, back to Maureen then.
Okay. We have a number of resources, which we mentioned before, located on our website. And in addition, you might want to be aware of the fact that the Department of Education also publishes, we still do some actual publications, the old hard copy kind. And through the Department of Education, if you just go out to www.ed.gov, do a search for publications, and it'll most likely bring up our edpubs.gov. And our edpubs.gov website, you can search by topic area or issue, and what will appear on the screen will be all the publications the department has published under that topic area. These publications are free. Sometimes you can order up to a certain amount. Sometimes that amount is limited, but if you are in a school and you'd like to be able to provide them to every parent, you can always include a note stating that you'd like extra copies because you want to be able to provide it to every parent. But here are just some other resources. Again, as you'll see, we have a lot of resources regarding the current law and the current guidance, and even moving forward, even when the Every Student Succeeds Act goes into full effect in 2017-2018, particularly around equitable services, districts and states, as we told them this past week, and I want to tell the private school officials, you're going to need to use both the old guidance and the new guidance, because much of that old guidance under Title I and the Title IX uniform provisions will be applicable. Some of it has changed, but you'll need to read it in conjunction with the new guidance under the Every Student Succeeds Act. These are the new ESSA resources. When you go to our home page, depending upon which link you click onto, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as reauthorized by NCLB, you'll get the previous resources. Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as reauthorized by ESSA, you'll get access to all these new ESSA resources. And again, our webinars on December 20th and January 10th. We're really easy to contact. You can contact us at onpe@ed.gov. That goes into our main mailbox, which is reviewed daily. And what's helpful about sending a message there, as it's reviewed, it can then be forwarded to the staff member who has expertise or responsibility in that area. You can also feel free to contact us too at 202-401-1365. And before we take questions, I just would like to say, and I'm sorry I didn't say at the very beginning, but this will be the last thought I want to leave you with. I want to thank you for the work that you do at the local level, whether you're at the diocesan level, the school level, the state level, whether you're a third-party provider, all of you who are really doing work and putting forth effort to ensure high-quality, caring communities for young people and the teachers within those communities. Thank you for the work you do every day on behalf of students. We keep that in mind as we do work for you and advocate on your students and teachers' behalf here at the U.S. Department of Education. So at this time, Andrea, we can accept questions, or if there's any comments you'd like to make before we accept the questions and seek to answer them.
Well, we do have a few questions that have come in. Someone indicated that they have an LEA that has made Title I allocations based on FTE. They create an average salary and determine FTE per school. Are they required to provide a per pupil calculation?
Under the current law, the LEA is required to discuss with the private school officials the amount of funding that is available for Title I services for the eligible students in that school. So that's the starting point. That's a statutory requirement. So the private school can ask the LEA, based on the number of low-income children in my school, how much funding was generated to then provide services to the eligible students in my school. Now, depending upon that amount, the district may be able to hire a teacher to come in 3 days a week and provide Title I services, or there may not be enough, and the district may say, the most we can do is a part-time teacher 1 day a week and can serve so many students. But all of that is part of the consultation process, and the law requires that the consultation is both timely and meaningful. Meaningful is in the law, so if there's some lack of knowledge here or understanding that you need for it to be meaningful, you should be able to ask the district about that. And they should be able to say, oh, yes, here's how we calculated the amount of Title I funds for Title I services for your students. And you know, on the resources page, you can click on to the Title I guidance, equitable services, and it's all in a Q&A format. You can bring that with you when you consult with the local educational agency and say, here, it says it right here, so you'll help me understand how this funding works.
Thank you. There was a slide earlier in the presentation that referenced parentally placed students for services. Can you clarify if that means that they do or do not have to have a district-issued IEP in order to receive services in a private school?
Just on that note, and this is where it can get a little bit tricky in the weeds, under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, parentally placed private school students with disabilities, they would not, in general, they do not receive an individualized education plan, an IEP. Rather, once the consultation has taken place, the amount of funding is determined, the LEA consults with the private school officials and representatives, parents of those parentally placed private school students with disabilities. Then the LEA says, okay, we're going to serve, out of the 20 students that are identified as students with disabilities and thus need services and special education, with the small amount of, let's say we just have a small amount of money, we're going to serve 10 of the 20 students. And then with those 10 students, the district develops a services plan. And in that services plan, the district says, this is what we're going to offer Johnny in your school. 2 days a week, we're going to offer Johnny occupational therapy, and it's through the services plan. If there's a student who's transferring from a public school who has an IEP and goes into the private school is not obligated to meet the requirements of that public school IEP, because again, under IDEA, private schools have no obligation. IDEA puts obligations on a local educational agency and state educational agency, not on the private school. If that doesn't get out what you're asking, please feel free to send your question to onpe@ed.gov.
Great, thank you. Can you comment, how extensive is the application process for the teacher and principal fellowship programs that you referenced?
That's a good question. I will say it is a competitive program, and the application process, there are some essay questions that the teacher and principal will need to respond to, but I would not say it's overly burdensome, but you are going to need to devote some time to that, because once you're chosen, and particularly if you come to the U.S. Department of Education, you're going to receive what I would say is a good salary to work at the department, and so that program is quite competitive.
Thank you. One final question. Ashley had referenced the Green Ribbon Program. How can somebody or a school be nominated by their state for the Green Ribbon Program?
It really depends on the state. So on the Green Ribbon School's website, there is information on who the state contact would be if there isn't a program in place in the state, because we have designated a certain level of leadership to this role. And so to be nominated by the state should have open at one period application process, and normally that would be in the fall or early winter, because they have to send all nominees from the state to the U.S. Department of Education on February 1st of 2017, and it always is the 1st of February that applications are sent to the U.S. Department of Education. So the state has to make the decision before that.
Very good.
On note on that, you might go out, I don't know what state you're from, but you might go out to the Green Ribbon School website just to see if there has been any other private school, or for that matter, public school, that has earned the Green Ribbon Award in your states, the reason I mentioned private school, you could certainly contact them to ask how they did it. And also, we know that too in some states, but not all of them, there is a statewide private school group. So in California, there's the California Association of Private School Organizations, CAPSO. And in that particular state, we are aware that CAPSO helped to facilitate and coordinated with the state that process. And again, that's not happening in all states, but those are just two other things I want to mention.
Oh, and additionally, one of the guidelines of the program is one of the 5 schools nominated to the Department of Education can be a private school. So therefore, if more than one private school in the state applied to the state, only one would go forward.
Very good. That concludes our questions for this evening. Do you have any final words for our audience before we sign off?
We wish you a very happy holiday season. We hope you get a chance to put your feet up and relax, because we know if anybody's deserving of it, it's people who work in schools. So thank you very much. And I want to just also thank NCEA for inviting us to collaborate with you on this. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to provide such information. And come back for the other webinars in the coming year.
Wonderful. Well, before we conclude, I invite all of you in our audience to visit ncea.org to see listings for both upcoming webinars and professional development activities. As was mentioned, we have a whole series of webinars provided by the Department of Education coming up this webinar season, as well as the call for proposals is open for our Exceptional Learners Conference. And that call for proposals is open until the end of December. So if you are doing wonderful work with exceptional learners or students with special needs, or you know someone who is, please go to ncea.org to put in a proposal for that event, which will take place this summer. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and thank you, Ashley and Maureen, for all that you've shared with us. As a reminder, we will be sending you this recorded webinar and the presentation materials via email within the next 24 hours. Thank you all again, and may you enjoy a blessed evening and happy holidays.